You're listening to PatchBay on tymkrs.
Welcome to PatchBay. I'm Whisker, and my co-host here is Shane. And I think
Hello.
we like to talk about audio stuff on this show. That's this show, right?
Yes, 9 times out of 10 it's about audio, and then there's 1 time out of 10 it's ADD.
Oh, well
Yes,
then.
but on rare occasions, it's mostly audio. Yeah.
So I got an email from Shane this week, and he was saying that he wanted to talk about miking strange things.
Yeah, not so much let me put this right. Not so much the weirdest miking technique as the weirdest thing you've put a mic in front of.
Yeah. And these are the sort of emails I get on a regular basis. Welcome to my world.
Yeah,
Yeah, my inbox is strange.
yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about it, and I've put some mics in front of some very weird things over the years. But I was curious as to why you thought of this.
Uh, there was a reason that popped into my head at the time that I sent it to you. I can't remember offhand what it was. I'm sure it will come up. It'll remind me as we're talking about it. But I had some time to think about it tonight on my walk, and one of the weirder things that I've ever recorded was a healing CD, and it was a whole bunch of like weird percussion instruments in a room when the guy was doing chanting, and he would um, he'd have a big bowl with water, and he would run his finger around the side of it. So I had to, and like just all these strange little things in the room. So I had to mic like everything in the room because I wasn't sure where he was going to go at what time during his whole healing ceremony thing that he did. So that was one of the weirder, well, I guess weirder sessions, but weirder things to mic, yeah, like bowls of water and yeah,
A bowl of water.
yeah.
How do you approach that?
Well, the whole thing at the because he kind of walked in with like 15 different items that could or could not end up happening within the mix, and I thought, well, I can't just put one mic up and hope for the best. So I think if I remember correctly, it was just a whole bunch of 57s on whatever. Like, here, I might ring this. All right, I want to put a 57 because it was all it was a live sort of um, situation,
Yeah,
right?
an
Like,
in the moment kind of thing.
yeah, and that was one of those ones where you gotta make do. You can't, talk the guy through it and go, okay, at a minute and 28 seconds, you're gonna hit this gong. Yes, for sure. So you need to. I just had to go with it at that point. It was a very sacrifice tonal quality of specific instruments for having enough microphones just to make sure everything was mic'd. And what it ended up happening was stuff got muted when it wasn't on, basically. But yeah, it was weird.
So I was thinking about it too, and the first one that came to mind was a track that Addie and I did a while back, like a year ago or so, um, with the specific goal of saying, okay, we're gonna just sort of throw all the rules out and have fun, which is always fun.
I love.
Um, yeah. So basically, the song is mostly written around a computer keyboard, a medicine bottle,
Cool.
a empty plastic cup and straw, and yeah, a guitar. But the guitar is mostly harmonic rings, not played normally.
Right, yeah. Like a feedback track kind of situation, sort of.
A bit, but
Yeah.
not plugged in though. It was just an acoustic.
Oh,
So yeah, we were pulling all the harmonics out of it just to get those rings, and that formed the harmonic, chord progression structure there, and everything was able to become musical off of those ringing tones. But the interesting thing was trying to figure out how to mic a plastic cup and a straw
yeah.
as a percussion instrument. It's a little bit more challenging than you'd think because the noises that it makes are interesting, but they're not very loud.
Yeah, I was gonna say you'd almost want to not have the mic too close to, like, the person's nose or something because you would, tend to get a little bit of, um, air coming from the nose or that kind of thing. You try to get just the sound of the cup and the straw. Yeah, that's weird. I've always. Are you familiar with Soundgarden?
Yeah, yeah, band back in the day.
Yeah, there is one song off of Super Unknown, and I can't remember which one it is. I'll put it in the show notes when I remember. But there's this sound in the background that sounds like a Dixie cup kind of cup, with like no liquid at the bottom. You know when you run out of drink and you're still trying to suck the last little bit out, and it's sort of like kind of a sound.
Mm-hmm.
And they must have looped it or something, but you can very hear it like really in the background. It's a very weird kind of um, tone, and it just that as soon as you said straw and cup, I was like, I swear that's like the end of a Slurpee or a slush puppy or something like that. You're trying to get the last little bit out of it in that tune. Kind of funny.
What we used it for was two different things. We took the top off, and we could thwack the bottom of the cup. And if you put the mic inside the
Oh,
cup, you get near field effect on the mic, so it accentuates the lower frequencies more. And
yeah.
we were actually able to do our kick drum like that.
Oh,
And
cool.
the other one we did was with the top on. Sometimes when you pull a straw in and out of the top of a cup, it makes that sort of honky noise.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
use that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's totally cool. That could be the almost the like when a drummer's playing hi hats and he opens them up for that on the eighth,
Mhm.
as they're
Mhm.
coming back around kind of thing, that pop kind of sound. That would work. That's neat. Yeah. The other thing I was getting at too, I was trying to remember. I'm still trying to remember exactly what the weirdest thing was that I mic'd, but as far as weird instruments are concerned, I've recorded bagpipes, um, which as an ensemble are a little easier to do than as a singular unit, but they're very, very, very loud. So trying to use condensers can be tricky as far as everything needs to be padded, obviously. And the other weird one is a cymbali. Have you ever seen or heard of one of them?
Probably if you could just explain what it is a little bit for the listeners.
It's a dulcimer, and there's like Irish people have the four-stringed hammered dulcimer. So what it is um, I believe it's three strings and then one doubled string, sort of like the way a 12 string is doubled,
Yeah.
um, or that sort of combination. But the Ukrainian version has 135 strings on it, and it's which is crazy. But it's I believe it's spelled Tsymballay. I'll put some links up to them. They're very in like traditional Ukrainian music. It's a very like a tone that it's a very strange instrument. But trying to record them is it's difficult. They're hammered, but yeah. Still there?
Okay. So yeah. Uh, Now, does that instrument have just a single sound hole?
What it is, they're usually sort of um, not they're rectangular, but they have it's like a sort of a triangle. I'll put a picture up. But what I tend to do is I mic them from the bottom, and then I'll mic them from the top, and the sound emanates from the top. There's a sound hole. The actual instrument is only about 2 inches deep, and it's usually about 4 feet wide or so, and it sits on a little cart kind of a thing. And what you do is um, there's chords based around the amount of strings, and wherever you hit on the sort of soundboard, it's still a hammered kind of thing. There's like different notes throughout it. So the ones that I've seen most of the time that I've recorded, they usually have little pieces of tape where it says like E flat, E, like just like sort of like the dots on a guitar kind of thing. But what I've found when recording them, you don't always get it's like a hum, like it never stops, right? It's sort of like strumming a 12 string and changing chords, but it's still echoing. And so what I found was making on the top, you would get like the actual hit of the hammer, but you wouldn't get a lot of the tone. You get a lot of like 1, 2K kind of like whack sound.
Yeah.
So to get the actual sort of chord sound of it, I would make it from the bottom, and there's no sound hole or anything like that, but it's just sort of like the wood emanating kind of, and I usually reverse one of them out of phase, and then basically mix to, do you want more attack or more? But yeah, they're very strange. When you get a chance, take a look at them. They're very strange instruments. But in Ukrainian music, like a lot of polkas and stuff, they're sort of like not so much the rhythm guitar, but they're there. Like if you were doing I guess the equivalent of doing like a rock power ballad and having strings in the background, kind of.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
very weird.
That it. I guess that one's kind of weird, but at least it's a musical instrument.
It's still an actual music. Yes. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is still an actual musical instrument. The first time I seen one, I was like, "What?" But
I'm pretty sure I've seen them before.
yeah.
Yeah, that they're a bit like the hammer dulcimer, but they're a lot bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, he's sort of the same idea, but on a grand scale. This other audio guy I talked to on Twitter a lot. His name's Slough. He's from New York. He's a Ukrainian guy. He's got a studio out in New York, but he actually knew what I was talking about because I believe he's recorded them a few times, and he may even have actually played them at one point in time too. So he was one of the only audio guys I talked to. He's like, "Oh yeah, I totally know how to do that. I've done it before, blah blah." Blah. But yeah, they're well. I mean, like any other sort of ethnic music, there's ethnic instruments that you don't see in the mainstream.
yeah, and you gotta go beyond your usual bag of tricks, which is great.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, like I tend to do. I mean, like even accordions. If you're just a straight ahead rock guy, looking at an accordion, you'd be like, "Well, what am I gonna do?" But um, you sort of start from the default miking techniques of anything, and then just work your way up to what works for you or what works for the player. I'm still trying to think about what the weirdest thing I have recorded. Anyway, go
I
ahead.
heard about an interesting one. I was
Yeah.
listening to one of Dead Mouse's live streams as he was sort of messing around, working on
Okay.
tracks, and he got distracted by his chat room, which happens regularly. And he started telling the story about how they produced the clap sounds that he was using. Um, what they did, they were goofing off, and they basically dropped their pants and started slapping each other's asses and
Nice.
recording it. And they had like 120 different ass slaps that they layered over one another to create the clap sound that he now uses on all of his songs.
That's hilarious. Uh, and he uses them on all his records.
Yeah, I guess, he's been building up his collection of sounds, over the years. And
Uh,
being Canadian, you guys
yeah,
have a different
we tend to
approach.
do weird shit. We definitely have to mark this one as explicit. Yeah, we do. There's a British version of engineer. I don't know if it's so much anymore, but for a while there used to be British engineering. There used to be American engineering. That like the techniques. Do you know about that?
No, no. Could
No,
you elaborate?
I can. This is from Behind the Glass. It's a book. I can't think of who the author is, but I'll put it in the show notes. It's a really good book, and it's a whole bunch of interviews with a bunch of different producers, from Steve Albini to Glenn Ballard to George Martin, just a bunch of different people on their techniques and stuff they do. And for a long time, there was two different schools of thought, and the American school of thought was to get the cleanest signal possible, the cleanest technique possible onto the record, and then fart it up after the fact. So any kind of processing, compression, EQ, whatever, any kind of effects were done after the fact on the mix or at the very last second. And the British way of engineering um, was the complete opposite. Guys like Eddie Kramer would, like, if Jimi Hendrix had a phaser on his guitar, he would record the guitar with effects, um, you know, inline everything, and he would even like record pans to tape and just anything that he could to set it up so that when it came to mix time for him, and a lot of English guys were like this, that they would basically put everything at zero and that would be the mix as far as like levels were concerned, stuff like everything was pre-thought out, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the basic difference was American guys would leave it until the end and then sort of fart it up, and then British guys would just sort of go for it. The problem there's obviously two problems with that. If you go for it and it's not right, you need to redo it. And if you leave it until the end, then you have endless possibilities and never finish. But for a long time, that was sort of the divide, and it had to do with um, the amount of tracking options at the time. I believe the British had less, like they had 4 tracks when the Americans had 8, kind of a thing. So
Yeah,
that was that. Yeah,
I've definitely read about this at some point. Yeah, it's very interesting the different approaches that you can take with that sort of thing. Um, these days, I think it's a little bit different because uh, you have so many tracks that pretty much everybody can record a clean version and an affected version if they wanted to. But you
yeah,
really run into that problem of you get into the post part of the
sorting out
process and it just becomes a nightmare.
exactly, like sorting it out in the end. And for me, I almost don't want to, like, if I'm doing a guitar part, I don't want to take the DI part. I want, is this how it's supposed to sound? All right, good. Let's go for it and make it, make it sound like it's supposed to. Having that to fall back on is great, but I mean, it depends on who's paying the bill and what the budget is, really. you know.
So personally, you like to approach it where you're trying to capture their sound.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I would sooner. I'm never really a fan of doing stuff as a secondary thing, like a just in case track. Um, more often than not, unless it's something like, say, a bass guitar where I have, um, you know, a lot of times every bass amp I've ever recorded is farty and spitty and yeah. So as a matter of fact, I record the DI just to have the DI for attack or to run through something because 9 times out of 10, bass amps just don't. For me, they don't record well. I don't know if you've had that same thing, but yeah,
Yeah, anytime where you're trying to record something that has a low frequency, it becomes more, especially if it's a loud lower frequency, it becomes a trickier animal, I think.
yeah, and even like as to whether the amp is. There's a big difference between having a brand new SVT, and an Ampeg or something versus like an old one that's old amps are good, but old beaten up, not taken care of amplifier. I'll take the DI signal any day, but yeah, no, I mean I tend to not do that unless I absolutely have to. Is it? How are we doing on time?
Oh, we got a couple minutes left. I was thinking of another one just now.
Hmm,
I took a sine wave, right?
okay.
And this is a really low sine wave, getting down into probably 25 to 30 hertz sort of range. So very, very low, low tone, barely audible. And I drove a powered studio monitor with it.
Ooh,
And it was a ported monitor. It's got the nice big port right down on the bottom of the front.
mhm.
And I
I have
took,
those same ones.
yeah, yeah. I think you use KRKs too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I do as well. So basically, what I did is I took a green bullet mic, which we've talked about on the show before, and I put it right up against the port. And I took my other hand and I put my fingers inside the port,
Okay.
and I allowed it to be just high enough gain so that if I had it wide open,
Uh-huh.
the mic would feed back
Oh,
through the speaker, but if I had
okay.
it closed, it wasn't quite loud enough to feed back, but the air moving back and forth from that sine wave
Right.
was loud enough with turbulence around my fingers to be picked up by the mic as whooshing sounds.
Oh, that's crazy.
Then
I
I
was
was
thinking,
able to move my fingers in and out in time with the beat that was going on to actually record,
really?
because I kept the beat in my headphones, so that it wouldn't get picked up by the mic, and I was
Yeah.
able to play the the feedback versus whooshing noises with my fingers. Yeah, and the effect is really cool. I'll have to put up the link to that track with this show too, uh,
Yeah,
just so
definitely.
you guys can sort of hear what's possible doing really like okay, we mic'd a speaker. Okay, that's kind of a normal thing to do, but no, we mark we mic'd the port and we fed it back on purpose, and we tried to pick up the noises that you'd normally never want to hear, and it sounds awesome.
That sounds cool. The whole time I was thinking, I'm like, this is entirely engineering lore, and the only way that it would have ever worked if it was your finger. If any other guy came in and tried to do it, it wouldn't have worked properly. Like if somebody, you know what I mean?
You
Like,
got to have the ear to be able to
yeah,
do that
well,
kind of thing.
exactly. But that's what I kept thinking. I'm like, because some guys will say, like, with mastering, it's like, it's not only the gear, it's like, the amount of cable or the copper in the cable versus whatever kind of cable, and the setting of the moon and its cycle and blah blah blah. But that's what I was thinking along the lines of like the super voodoo. That's hilarious. I was thinking when you were telling me too about uh, when I was in school, one of the guys that was teaching me did a track where he used a kick drum sample of they had recorded a guy's esophagus. Um, Not so much beatboxing, but just doing like a kind of like a really low thing just from the throat. And they
Yeah.
ended up just using that, but instead of, because this is back in the days of decent software samplers, um, they had to either triggered it through MIDI or they actually went and made samples and tabbed transient and saved, like basically copied and pasted for every single kick drum hit, and then they took the drums out, kind of sort of situation. So, yeah, that's cool. Actually, that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how people respond to that too, because I that entire track was all done through um very interesting, different sort of engineering focused ways of approaching all of the material that's on it. I did it because I was wanting to do something to honor one of the greats of what we do, a lady named Delia Derbyshire.
Mm.
In England, she worked for BBC at the Radiophonic Workshop. She's responsible for doing like the Doctor Who theme song, the original one.
Okay.
And so this is like
Yeah.
one of the epic, you know, most talented audio engineers that has ever lived or will ever lived kind of people. And yeah, I wanted to do something to sort of honor her, so I approached it from that mentality of, you got this slightly crazy lady who works in a mad scientist laboratory with tape machines and makes all these crazy noises and becomes, the noises themselves become beloved by millions and millions of people. The soundtrack for science fiction television for the last 40 years is, directly a result of the work of Delia and her friends over at BBC. So yeah,
Just you talking about that gave me like four different things I was going to point out. One, just talking about science fiction soundtracks. Like the whole theremin Star Trek thing. It was never really an instrument that was ever used really in anything until Star Trek, and then it has been used in a bunch of other stuff. I don't know if you ever listened to Cold Chamber.
no.
No, okay, they're kind of a heavy band, sort of post grunge. They called themselves Spooky Core.
Uh,
So, which is cool. It's not Rob Zombie, but it's like heavy metal. I don't know how to explain it. It's cool stuff. Check their stuff out. Second thing I was going to point out with the whole making weird things and girl engineers, this chick named Sylvia Massey Shiva, Shiva. I'll post a link. She did a couple of Tools records, and on one of them, I guess on every record she does, she tends to try and do one sort of group project thing, coming up with sort of a crazy sound just for getting people out of the studio and doing something different. And they actually dropped a grand piano off a cliff and mic'd it on its way down.
huh.
Yeah. And it sounded like dying music, I guess, apparently. She said she'd never do it again because she just felt so bad, the sounds that came out of this thing. And
Huh.
it was obviously an expensive piano, but the whole point of the project was to get the band out of their comfort zone, probably try and come up with some kind of cool effect that they could use at some point. And they did end up using it on a song, but it was more like a team building kind of experience at the time. But in the interview, which is also in that Behind the Glass book, she says like she would never do something like that again, just because she felt so bad listening back to it. So that was the two things that had popped into my brain while you were talking about the lady from the Doctor Who soundtrack. So she influenced like a whole bunch of other stuff, I guess, eh?
Yeah, yeah, you should look her up. Delia Derbyshire, and really fascinating lady. Yeah, she was one of the pioneers. Um, I don't in electronic sound, electronic music. She was had a musical background, so she approached engineering from a musical kind of way, and because of that, it was right as synthesizers didn't even exist yet, so they were creating these sounds with just
Oh yeah.
basic oscillators and tape machines and stuff, and yeah, really, really fascinating stuff.
There's a guy, I think what that Miroslav orchestra, the Miroslav samples, which you can buy. Um, and he did this. It was like sort of one of the first real synthesizers. And when he was creating them, um, he was doing like samples of like 2 or 3 gigs at a time to create these samples. And this was way before the ability to even save 2 or 3 gigs of space. Like I don't know if he was recording it to DAT or what he was recording it to, but it sort of reminds me of the same thing. The other thing I was going to mention too, did you ever hear about the guy that did that whole album with dot matrix printers?
Yeah, I've seen all sorts of things like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's if you're into electronics, you sort of you get exposed to that sort of thing. Yeah, it's fun to see them when they can actually pull off the music side of it with that. To
yeah.
me, it's kind of just annoying if they can't bring out the music out of it.
Right. That the couple that I've seen were not entirely music. It just the whole premise of trying to make it work is interesting. As to whether, I guess that's the question as to whether it works or not. Um, but yeah, I mean, just even thinking about that is just kind of a cool idea.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's people that I know that have used all sorts of crazy things, like taking a hard drive and opening it up and tapping into the armature so that the swinging back and forth of the arm in the hard drive is being driven by an audio amplifier to get sound out of it that way.
ooh,
Um, yeah, using acoustic coupler modems as effects
hmm,
from the early '80s, late '70s. Just uh, the guys who do circuit bending on cheap old keyboards, they do some pretty awesome stuff. Um, Building your own little glitch circuits for noise sources and strange oscillating circuits and hacking old toys to get the weird PCM
mm,
sampling out of them and then tapping into them at different points to get it to do all sorts of strange things, speaking spells. There's a million different things that I could think of that are
There's a
not the standard guitar cabinet with a mic in front of it. It's
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. I was gonna say I remember reading about there was I can't remember if it was a Fisher Price thing or something. You could record video on it, but it was like really cheesy and really like I think you get like 15 seconds or something. I can't remember exactly, but there's a whole community based around making movies off of these things, and it's like sort of the 8 millimeter kind of where you have to crank it kind of thing. But these guys are buying these old Fisher Price toys and then making. I don't know if it's in a bear or something, but obviously makes it difficult to shoot video holding a bear at the same time or whatever. But yeah, it just reminds me of that it's amazing what people can come up with when they have the time. That's the real, I guess, divide, right? Is having the time to be able to attempt it to see if it works. You know what I mean?
yeah. Looks like it was the Fisher Price PXL 2000 cassette tape video recorder.
There you
and
go.
and
That's what
I've
it was.
seen those the footage off of them, and the effect of the sort of low um, resolution and whatnot of how they functioned is absolutely beautiful in the right context.
Yeah, and especially if you have like a decent script and a guy who has a clue about doing video in the first place. Um, yeah, I've seen a few, and there's whole communities based around it. It's very interesting. Speaking to that too, like I know some like hardcore film guys. I don't know if you know the guys I'm talking about, but the ones with the goatee and like film student type guys that just do
Sure.
stuff on film. And I remember working with one guy where we put his production on DVD, but he shot the whole thing on used film. So his video, there was trace images of stuff that had happened on the previous film. He shot over it on purpose, and then afterwards he did stuff like a little bit too much acid bath or whatever it was, and um, you know, chop. It was a horror movie, obviously, but he did stuff with razor blades, or he would kind of put a nick in every 30 pieces of film or 29.97 pieces of film or whatever the case was. Um, just I'm thinking just to be like push that boundary. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, I think that theme here for everybody out there is that uh, a lot of the tutorials and guides out there about getting into recording are going to tell you how to use, the existing known technology, blah blah blah, and all of that is good to know. It's a good foundation, but the real fun starts when you throw that book away and start coming up with your own way to approach creating sound on recorded medium. And yeah, it's a good thing to realize that there aren't any rules at the end of the day, and you can come up with your own techniques, and that's fine. Just don't break the studio's board doing it. All right, that's all the time we have for this week. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back again next Friday at patchbay.tv. You can subscribe through the RSS feed on the page, get it on your phone, your iTunes, whatever, or you can just push play right there and listen to it in a web browser. It's super easy. That's it for us. We'll see you guys next week.
Good night.